Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel. I'm so delighted you've joined me this evening, wherever you are in the world. And if you haven't subscribed, please do so. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started. Tonight's story is an Appalachian story, and there are two creatures that arise in this story, so I think you're going to find it very interesting. Let's get started. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Earl, and my Bigfoot encounter happened in a large forest area in the Appalachian Mountains. My story begins when I was working night shift as a nurse in accident and emergency, and the late hours I worked rarely did cause havoc and chaos on my marriage. My wife emphatically believed that I didn't make any time for her and relentlessly complained. I was so frustrated because I adored my job, and the late hours I worked simply went with the territory. Before we'd got married, I had warned her that there would be weekends when I would be working nights, and she had assured me that that would never be a problem for her. However, the stark reality for my wife was exceedingly different, and she simply hated me not being around with her, and especially when she interacted with other married couples. She said she hated being the odd one out, and everyone would look at her so pitifully because she was always unaccompanied at social events and felt terribly alone. One day my wife gave me a final ultimatum, and she said to me, "It's me or your job. You choose." I really felt overwhelmed that my marriage had come to this pitiful, low and dreadful place in my life, but I knew that my job was a huge passion for me, and being forced to give it up would make me resent my wife all the more, and that was something I didn't want to do. Finally, I agreed to the divorce because it was all or nothing as far as my wife was concerned. It was dreadfully sad that we could not reach an amicable compromise, but that was the way things panned out for us. I didn't want the headaches of arguing, fighting or bickering, and so I decided to just let sleeping dogs lie, and that's what I did. I was surprised to find many people working night shift hours, all who were experiencing challenges with their marriage, because their partners just could not accept the late hours they were invariably working. Working alongside the night shift with me was another male nurse called Bobby, who was also experiencing challenges in his marriage over exactly the same issues that I had been going through. His wife had recently filed for divorce, saying that she couldn't cope with the ungodly hours that he worked, and this was not the kind of life that she had envisioned for herself. One day, Bobby and I decided that we would go on a camping trip together, as we both going through a divorce, and we both felt a little camping in the open countryside and the beautiful fresh air would help us to embrace brand new beginnings and let go of the nagging regrets from our past. Fast forward a day or so, and there we were happily camping somewhere very remote and way off the beaten track, in the middle of literally nowhere, without a single soul in sight. Bobby and I longed for this isolation and the space to clear our heads, and so this solitary paradise we embraced heartily with enthusiastic vigour and great appreciation. We were camped out on a smooth open clearing in the middle of the forest. It was an idyllic spot that was breathtakingly beautiful, overlooking a gloriously stunning gushing stream, surrounded by pretty rocky outcrops consisting of natural rocky masterpieces that looked like great works of art. We were camped on a very high elevation, so everywhere we looked we had the most exquisite panoramic views over this ubiquitous rambling wilderness of tall, majestic green trees that literally carpet the valleys in contrasting layers of thick green foliage that was utterly breathtaking. One evening, as Bobby and I were sitting by the fire pit close to our pitched tents, we chose to watch the sunset while we drank delicious hot cups of coffee. The sky was rippled with tangerines, yellows, deep pinks and reds. It was stunning. I'm glad to say that all negative talk about our impending divorces had dissipated and completely faded. It was amazing how healing and therapeutic the natural wonders of nature could be to your emotional well-being. I think the huge vastness of nature makes you vividly aware of just how microscopic and tiny we are in the huge scheme of things, and it truly gives you a grander perspective of life altogether. I was thinking and pondering over all of this when I saw a very strange elderly woman eyeing us from a distance. There was something outer-worldly about her appearance, as strange and as odd as this may sound. It was like she didn't belong and was out of place, not to mention that she looked airily sinister. "What the heck?" gasped Bobby. "What is that woman doing here, in this remote place? Should we go and see if she needs our help?" "Leave her be," I said. "There's something distinctly odd about her." The woman just stood there, staring at us, making me feel very uncomfortable. Who was she, and what was she doing here, I wondered. "I want her gone," said Bobby. "I don't like the way she keeps staring at us. She's giving me the creeps." Bobby went over to speak to the woman, while I watched him curiously wondering what on earth he was saying to her. I watched her suddenly retreat back into the woods as Bobby returned to our fire pit, looking strangely pale and very perplexed. "She's gone," he said, sitting down and swigging down a large glug of coffee that was already cold by now. "What's the matter?" I asked. "You look as white as a sheet." "It's that woman," said Bobby. "Something about her is distinctly off." "What do you mean?" I asked. "It's her dark eyes, and the way she spoke. No, it wasn't normal." "Did you ask her what she's doing here, and what she wants?" I asked. "That's just it," he said. "When I asked her, she turned the question around on me and said, more to the point, 'What are you doing here?'" "Did you tell her we are camping here?" I asked. "I did, and she said that this land was not ours. Can you believe the cheek of it?" I was angry. "Who does she think she is?" I protested. "We have just as much right to camp here as anybody else does." "You do get strange people in this world of ours," reflected Bobby. "We knew that better than most. She's probably barking mad." He was right, of course. No one knew that better than we did, because we both worked with emergency cases all the time from every walk of life, and we'd met some of the most cantankerous, difficult and belligerent people that you could ever hope to meet in your entire life, as well as the most extraordinary, kind, gracious and courageous people. Our lives were truly made of a tapestry of unusual threads that all played a role in weaving this strange carpet that we choose to call life. Suddenly we spotted the old woman again, staring at us through the trees with those cold, dark, hostile eyes. And she looked at us like a predator. That's how weird it was. "Not again," I said. "I thought you said that we'd got rid of her." "I'm going to tell her to go," I said, raising myself off the ground and hastily walking towards the woman. "Good luck with that," I heard Bobby call after me. As I approached the woman, I began to experience a horrible, ominous chill. It was like I'd become enveloped in this cold spot, because it was utterly freezing standing near to her, and there was something so creepy about those dark, black, coal-like eyes that sent cold shivers down my spine. "Hello there," I said, trying to mask the irritation I felt about her presence. "I noticed you earlier looking at us. Do you need help or something? We just want to enjoy this space to ourselves, if you don't mind." "This is not your space to enjoy," she croaked in a voice that was disturbingly hoarse and hostile. "Well, I think that's a bit unfair," I said. "Anyone can camp out here. This spot is open to everyone. We are not camping on private land, you know." "Of course you can camp here," she said, "but none of it is yours. It doesn't belong to you." I studied the woman curiously. She looked exactly like a witch if ever I saw one. She was attired in a long dark cloak with a hoodie and a long black flowing skirt, and she had a skin that was so grey it was almost ashen in colour. Her body was long, willowy and somewhat frail, but her beady brown eyes were so dark they were almost black, and she had the most awful hooked nose that looked exactly like a vulture's beak, that was way too large for her tiny face. I knew that this woman was an irritant like a mosquito bite, that when you scratch gets itchier and itchier, and there is little you can do to calm down that inflammation. And so you have to stop itching, otherwise it gets worse. She was exactly like that, so clearly best ignored, otherwise things would invariably get a lot worse. "Well, do what you want," I said. "We're not moving." And at that I walked away. "See," said Bobby, "that old hag is barking mad, didn't I tell you?" "Did you notice how cold it was around her?" I said. "I did," said Bobby. "I've never experienced a chill like that in someone's presence before. It was very peculiar." As you can imagine, Bobby and I were glad to see the back of the old hag, as we watched her finally retreat in the woods. There was something so odd about her, and that was something we could not fathom, but we gave her no more thought as the evening progressed. Bobby and I were so conditioned to stay up late every night, and this night we assumed would probably be no exception to that rule. I began to relax by the fire, and we started to talk, and once again the subject of divorce had been all but washed away by the tide, and other subjects of interest and intrigue came into our focus and discussion. The blazing bright tangerine sky had all but vanished, and the escarpment was now painted in a light grey hazy mist that was growing darker with each passing minute, as night ventured closer, and the full moon finally graced us with her soft golden light, along with the twinkling stars. Suddenly Bobby and I were alerted to the sound of huge wings flapping above us, and we gazed up in the night sky to see something flying above us, like a dark, shadowy form that we couldn't make out. "See that?" gasped Bob in horror. "What in God's name is that?" The dark form appeared to be gliding up and down the mountainous expanse, and sometimes soaring high into the sky, like a monstrous huge bat. But this was no bat. It was a huge vulture-like bird of about 8 feet tall, aligned with dark black feathers and a massive 8-foot wingspan, a huge yellow beak, and big red eyes that were as bright as traffic lights. It really felt like the whole valley had been cloaked in a menacing ambience that engulfed the whole area with a feeling of impending doom. The strange bird-like humanoid soared above us, making the most horrendous squawking sounds that I have ever heard in my entire life. It literally caused my heart to race and my body to physically shake with absolute terror, a terror that I still cannot describe to you. I could see that Bobby was faring as badly as I was, and possibly worse, because he looked utterly terrified. His eyes had grown as large as saucers, and his mouth just hung open in horror, almost as if his gasp was totally frozen by fear. We watched the bird gliding towards an outstretched tree, and then it landed on a branch and perched there, clawing the underlying branch with its massive talons. All the while we sensed, saw, and experienced those predatory, evil red eyes, staring hostilely at us, at the same sinister way of the horrible hag had stared at us earlier. "Is that real?" I asked Bobby, "or is my imagination playing tricks on me?" "It's real," said Bobby faintly. "I've never seen such a huge bird in all my life, and it almost looks human." "Why does it keep staring at us like that?" I said in alarm. "It's creeping me out." "I think it wants us out of here," said Bobby. "Let's get some sleep," I said. "We're not in a position to move now, but tomorrow we're getting out of this crazy place." Bobby agreed, and we retreated into the tent. But even within those canvas walls, we could feel those hostile eyes on us. "Should we shoot that bird?" asked Bobby suddenly. "We could, you know." "I don't think so," I said. "Something feels very wrong about all this. First we see that witch-like lady, and now this hideous bird." "You don't think they could be one and the same?" asked Bobby. "I mean the woman and the bird. Like a shapeshifter, I mean." "I doubt it," I said. "The bird out there is very real. I just hope it's gone by now." As if on cue, suddenly we heard a loud squawking and a heavy flapping of wings, and Bobby and I looked at each other in relief. It did sound like it had flown away. "I think it's gone," I said. "Let's get some sleep." I'm afraid to say that sleep was far from me. I lay there restlessly, begging for sleep to visit my wakeful state, but it ignored my desperate plight and eluded me. So I just lay back with eyes wide open, waiting for the morning to come. I got up very early that morning because of my restlessness. I thought a great walk would do me good, and so I ventured towards the woods, hoping to see some early signs of animal life. I was eager to take some photographs of squirrels, chipmunks, or even a passing deer. I always loved animals, and I loved taking pictures. As I was walking in the woods, I noticed the footprints of the woman in the soft ground, and I followed them out of curiosity, wondering whether she would be camping or whether she was some wild woman who roughed it and lived in a cave. Nothing would have surprised me about her at all. The small footprints of the woman finally came to a dead end, and then I saw these massive bird-like tracks leading away from the footprints, and they were monstrously huge, at the very least 10 inches long and equally as wide. They had to be the markings of a huge bird, like the one we'd seen last night. It really did make me wonder if the bird and woman were connected in some way, but this was way too far-fetched for my rational mind to even begin to comprehend. I hastily retreated to our campsite and woke up Bobby immediately. "Let's get out of here and go camping somewhere else," I suggested. "I'm not going to let that giant bird and horrible hag rob us of enjoying this trip." That night things went amazingly well. We pitched our tents for the night near a pretty creek surrounded by trees. We prepared a fire pit and retired to bed and slept until late that morning. It was on the third night at this camping spot that things began to change for us. It must have been early evening when we were sitting by our fire pit just talking when suddenly we heard a loud, shrill scream that sounded exactly like a woman being killed. Bobby and I immediately reacted as if we were on duty at the hospital. We put on our head torches, took out an extra flashlight with us, including our rifles, and ran towards those screams. It was as if it was just so natural for us to do this. As we got closer to the screams, we detected a heavy, thunderous movement in the brush, and the only way I can describe it is that it sounded exactly like a rhino in the thicket. This caused me grave concern because I began to sense that a powerful predator could be lurking around. I indicated to Bobby to follow my lead, as we found a large tree that both of us could easily hide behind. We stood there in silence, waiting for something to happen, although what would happen we had no idea. Then we heard a loud thump and heavy movements of a rhino-like creature. I started to cock the rifle in case we were ambushed by this thing. We could see blobs of black passing us in the undergrowth until the blob appeared on an area of flat grass so that we finally got to see it clearly. I focused on this black shadowy form and couldn't see what it was at first. And then I began to think that we were seeing a bear. But then I realized it was not a bear at all. What was it? I couldn't imagine, as I had never seen a creature like this in all my life. It stood on 2 legs like a man, with a similar posture, only this thing was huge. It could only be described as a giant-like hairy humanoid, with a huge resemblance to a great ape. It had very long ape-like arms, only much thicker and much stronger. The torso of this thing was like that of a really bulky bodybuilder, with huge shoulders and a cone-shaped head. I noticed the long face had a very distinct brow ridge, deep-set eyes, and a slender mouth. This creature was easily 8 foot tall and 800 pounds. I suddenly realized that I was seeing this creature clearly with the light from my head torch, but the creature appeared oblivious to our torchlight. I think it may be because we were hiding behind a tree, and the torchlight kind of dappled the forest floor in the way that moonlight does, so I think the creature was none the wiser to our presence, at least I hoped so. I was terrified because if this creature did indeed see us, I was certain we were dead, because he was an incredible predatory-looking animal. I could feel my heart pounding and my body shaking, but I tried to compose myself lest the creature should see us. The creature just seemed to stand there, and it finally sat down against a huge tree and let out a huge sigh, exactly like a human does. Oh, oh. It then proceeded to scratch its head and examine its nails, nibbling them after each scratch, as if he'd found a nit to eat. I then heard him grunting to himself happily, and then reaching for his huge feet with his hands, he appeared to be rubbing them, and as he did this, he groaned in pleasure, just like we would if someone was massaging our feet. Bobby and I stared at this creature with horror transforming into awe and disbelief, all at the same time. The creature slapped some flying insect that was buzzing around its body like an irritating mosquito, and he killed it instantly and popped it into his mouth and chewed it. This happened a few times, and he was making a snack of those flying insects and smacking his lips after eating them. Suddenly there was a sound of a squirrel or some other animal that raced up the tree, and the creature stood up, his senses alerted, peering up the tree with eyes fixated on the branches. It appeared that he'd seen something he wanted, so he darted over to the trunk, straddled it with his strong muscular legs, and shimmered up the trunk to get whatever this thing was. I am almost certain that he was successful, because he reacted so fast and so swiftly to the movement. And he was an agile creature with incredible grace. Bobby and I didn't hang around to see what was going to happen, but hightailed out of the woods as fast as we could, rushing back to our tents. We were both breathing heavily as we arrived at our tents, and we were so overwhelmed by what we had seen that for a moment our ability to speak was seriously impaired. We sat there in stupefied silence, and I finally opened up a packet of sweet toffees that we ate hastily and hungrily, as if we had not eaten for days, which was so far from the truth. The sugar rush did the trick, and truly it is the best thing to overcome shock. What on earth was that thing? I said to Bob, after having worked my way through half the candies. It was a Bigfoot, said Bobby. Are you sure? I asked. Aren't those things just the stuff of myth and legends? Wake up, Earl, said Bobby. Everything that's happened to us on this camping trip is weird and outer-worldly. I cannot explain any of it, but the creature was real, and I believe it had to be a Bigfoot. I was stunned. Bigfoot, I thought. Who would have ever believed it possible? I was amazed by such a revelation. I hadn't even believed the creature existed, and now I had been staring face to face with one. The next day, Bobby and I decided to return home. We'd seen things in the mountains that we couldn't explain, and we didn't want to hang around a moment longer. When I returned home, I did my research on Bigfoot, and I can confirm without a doubt that the creature we saw that night was very definitely a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch or a Yeti or a hairy man, whatever you choose to call it. As for the bird-like humanoid and the strange old woman, what were they? Was it possible they were one and the same? Could it have been a shapeshifter or a real cryptid creature? Was it a birdman, I wondered. I'm not certain of the answers to those strange questions, but I know this experience in the Appalachian Mountains has made me question reality and what really is out there in the Appalachian Mountains. As for my marriage and Bobby, we did both finally get divorced 5 years later. We are both now happily married to different women who are also night shift nurses like ourselves, both working in accident and emergency, and we have never been happier. Bobby and I both feel that our hiking and camping trip on the mountains help us to move forward in our lives without looking back with regret or bitterness. Well, first of all, I just want to thank you so much, Earl, for the most extraordinary story. You know, you are not the first to talk about very strange encounters that happen in the Appalachian Mountains. Now, I don't know much about the Birdman. I have heard of him. I don't know whether you saw the Birdman or whether that old woman actually was a shapeshifter. It sounds possible that she could have been. I don't know what anybody else thinks. But as far as your Bigfoot encounter is concerned, that was incredible too. And what a really fabulous insight into what Bigfoot was doing all on his own, smacking away the insects, climbing up a tree to get a squirrel. Quite fascinating, really. Until next time, goodbye and good night.